Oh, hey, no. Don't leave. Don't leave. I know it's scary. The title really, especially if you're somebody who believes this. Just be patient. And look, I'm not going to hurt you. I promise. We're not going to hurt you. But I really want you guys to stay tuned because is Daniel really a forgery? I mean, this is a huge, huge question. Before we get into this, I was reading Dr. Richard Carrier's book, and you really should go down in the description and get this thing. But don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere because Jonathan Sheffield created an intro. And if you don't know who he is, I'll show you his YouTube channel in just a second. But I've been up to some things. Let's just put it this way. The gods are really interested in MythVision. So if you don't believe me, take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, we are MythVision. This will be an epic show, just like that introduction. All thanks to my good friend Jonathan Sheffield, who plays a role in this actual situation here. There was a debate not too long ago, on modern day debate, between Dr. Joshua Bowen, Jim Majors, who's a PhD student, and his expertise is in the focus of Daniel, Jonathan Sheffield, and Dr. Boyce. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead, and I'm not going to wait any longer. We have Dr. Richard Carrier joining us today. What is happening?
Hey, I'm enjoying warm springtime weather up on the mountain today. So
awesome. Well, you hurt my feelings with that article. Actually, you hurt my feelings from 9 years ago. No longer do my feelings get hurt over this subject matter. I'm just teasing. So you really, something about you before we get started, Dr. Carrier, I don't know if you did like a lot of practicing on throat jabbing when you were younger. You just like don't mess with me. And you just go straight to the Adam's apple and you want people to like, So your article doesn't play games. It gets like right to the thing and it strangles you and makes you really have to face the reality of what's happening. So yeah. I had to title this book. I had to title this video exactly after your article, which is like not a is Daniel forgery. It's like, here's the evidence
right.
It is.
Yeah.
Before we get started, Jonathan Sheffield's YouTube channel is here. Jonathan is a Christian. Okay. He's my friend. This is what we should have, interfaith dialogue. He's a really, really nice guy. He created that intro, and I put his YouTube channel in the description. Tons of different videos he's done. One I love about the Matrix. I had to give him a shout out for spending so much time after having a newborn baby, creating this intro for me, man. Thanks a lot. I really appreciate your help. And then we also have Dr. Richard Carrier's books. All of these books, if you go down, I have the Amazon link down below. You guys can go there or go to Amazon.com. You can go to his website. All of that's in the description. You can find his books. It's a must get. And then the most recent that I was looking at, Jesus from Outer Space. So that one's going to be a lot less time to consume than his On the Historicity. I recommend you guys check that out. Like, really go and look at that because it's powerful. If you don't mind, I'm going to give a short, brief bio about you, and let's get into Daniel being a forgery. Dr. Richard Carrier is the author of Sense and Goodness Without God, On the Historicity of Jesus, The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire, and many other books, including Jesus from Outer Space, of course, chapters and articles. With a PhD in ancient history from Columbia University, he specializes in the modern philosophy of naturalism, the origins of Christianity, and the intellectual history of Greece and Rome. For more about him and his work, visit www.richardcarrier.info. www.richardcarrier.info in the description right now. Go support him, join his Patreon, help him out, because that's how he makes a living. It's how he survives. And I've actually, had you do projects. You know, I hired you to do projects. So
right, yeah. And that's what I do. I actually do contract work. So you're not my only client. So yeah, I prefer this, like being an independent scholar who works on contract, who's making his own income through his own revenue streams, blogging. So Patreon is a major supporter of my life and work now. So I prefer that because it gives me total freedom. I don't have to kowtow to any academic committees or whatever, and limiting what I can and can't talk about, and what I can and can't say. So, or time even. I find like professorships just hog all of your time with useless committee work and tons of other things. I have a lot more time to actually focus on the work.
Less politics. Right.
Less politics as well. Yeah. Yeah. But yes, that the result is that I cobble together an income through various sources, and one of them is contract work, do research and things for people. So, and awesome. I'm always glad for getting work from you or anyone else. So,
yeah. So if anyone's interested, you guys go down there. You could find a way to contact him, of course, checking out his blog, stuff like that. Yesterday, I was interviewing Dr. Goodacre, and he had nothing but good things to say about you, by the way. And I mean that with sincerity. I'm not just saying that. It was really wonderful. He cites you in an upcoming work as his first footnote, he said. And he was shocked to find that you were the guy who actually said this. He's like, I thought nobody out there had ever seen this. And he goes, this guy, Richard Carrier, has an eye. So the mainstream is obviously looking and going, you know what? And I like him because he respects where good scholarship is. He admits it and he points that out. Dr. Carrier, look, Daniel is a heated area. Christians rely on it. Jews rely on it. It's an extremely religious, I like to call, it's like an elbow. It's the elbow in this whole thing. And without it, you have a problem in many directions that you had, like Orthodox Judaism as well as Christianity. Many groups that I was part of as well hinge on this. Well, the prophecy was fulfilled in the first century. But anyway, Dr. Carrier, take us into why is this important if Daniel's a forgery, and then we'll delve into this further. You froze up. There you are. Did you catch me?
Yeah, I'm waiting to see if yeah, okay. So
he's freezing up, ladies and gentlemen.
Oh, silly mountain internet again. Yes, so why is Daniel a forgery? What is the significance of it?
He disappeared. Hold on. He'll be back. Please be patient. Hit that like button if you guys are tuning in right now. He is in the mountains in California. And so, look, there he is. There he is.
Yeah.
All right.
Internet is dodgy. Yeah. Internet is unreliable up here. But anyway, where I was, so Christianity is very much founded on Daniel and the Book of Enoch. People forget like how much the Book of Enoch is a foundational scripture for Christianity, because that scripture wasn't preserved in what we now call the Old Testament. So people forget that was actually an important one. But Daniel's another really important one, and that did get into the Old Testament, the later Old Testament, that so declared, because it claims, or Christians claimed that it would predict the Messiah, their Messiah. You know, they think they see Jesus in Daniel 9. And that is not what the book originally meant. The original authors of Daniel 9 meant a completely different person. They were their Messiah, their anointed one that they talk about as dying, being killed, is Onias III, who was high priest of the Jewish temple in 171. He was killed in 171 BC. And so this Daniel was written as propaganda. We have tons of evidence for this, and I cover it all in the article. If people want to go into it, we might get into some of the details today. It's obvious that whoever wrote this sort of created it as like a forgery so that people think that this is an ancient prophetic text that predicted their victory against Antiochus in the civil war, the rebellion, the Jewish rebellion against their Greek overlords. And part of this storyline was the killing of Onias, who was a very revered, almost saintly-like figure. So his assassination was like the thing, the match that lit the fire, basically. It's like that really, like, that's it. We're done here. And so they used that to motivate people. So they sort of made it look like Daniel, this prophet, had hundreds of years ago predicted that Onias would be assassinated, and predicted that soon after God would come and vanquish their enemies and paradise would reign on earth, kind of thing. So that was what they wrote it for originally. And that explains some of the weird details in it. Like Daniel 9 has some very convoluted, strange mathematics in it. And that the Onias thing, trying to make it fit Onias is the reason for that. But when it failed, like it predicted, the end of the world was coming, paradise would come, and it didn't come. Now they won the war. So that there was a partial success, but the prophecy still did not, the rest of the prophecy wasn't fulfilled. So what happens when prophecies fail? All the time, all religions, they don't abandon the prophecy. They don't declare it false. No, they reinterpret it, right? They say, well, it must have meant something else. And so then they reinterpret it as referring to some other future Messiah. And we have examples in the Dead Sea Scrolls and various other places of where all these Jewish sects were trying to figure out what the real prediction was, right? Now, the reality is that there was never any intended prediction beyond this, right? It was only intended for the war, the Maccabean War. It was only intended for refer to Onias and so on. But continuing to try and make the Bible code work for them to try and find a new Messiah, lots of groups were doing this, and they were trying to figure out what date would fit. And one of the best fits, like the easiest way to do it is the 30s AD, which actually is what the Christians did, right? They said that's, we can make the math work the 30s AD. Our guy died in 30s AD. Therefore, we have the real guy. Our guy is the Messiah who was predicted, right?
Is this like pin the tail on the donkey, kind of, sort of?
With no actual donkey, but you claim that there's a donkey there, and then you pin the tail on and say that's where the tail goes, right? Okay. It's more like that. And the funny thing is, I did a whole video for people who want some sort of humorous and educational backstory on this for Wichita, and I've talked about this before, but in my Wichita talk, when Harold Camping predicted the end of the world, and it was called Rapture Day, right? Like it was going to be the end of the world. On Rapture Day, Wichita, the atheist group in Wichita, had me come out and give a speech on Doomsday, and my speech was "You're all going to die," and so if you Google "You're all going to die," maybe "We're all going to die." I think it was "You're all going to die," but anyway, it doesn't matter. You'll find it. Wichita. Rapture Day talk. And I go into how the Jews kept trying to predict the end of the world and failing repeatedly, and that this process led to Christianity. Christianity was caused by this. So it started with Jeremiah. That's a classic example of the origin of cognitive dissonance theory. Yeah, for the study of prophets. The same thing, right? When prophecy fails, they just reinterpret it. They get stronger belief rather than running away or giving up on it, right? So contrary to intuition, I think is the thing there. But it started with Jeremiah. Jeremiah had a prediction about when the exile would end. The prediction was failed. It didn't come true. The exile ended earlier than he claimed it would. And so in Daniel 9, you see the first thing that happens is Daniel is begging God to explain how did you let Jeremiah get it wrong? What's going on? I don't understand. And then Gabriel comes down and says, let me tell you the secret. And then he reinterprets Jeremiah's prophecy. So it's a failed prophecy being reinterpreted. And of course, it conveniently works out to be Onias. He was actually predicting Onias, yada, yada, and the victory over the Antiochenes and so on. And so that was the Seleucids, so the victory over the Seleucids. So it was predicting all of that. Then that prophecy failed because it predicted various things would happen that didn't happen. The end of the world didn't come, etc. So then the attempts to reinterpret the reinterpretation of the failed prophecy, so it's got multiple failed prophecies, multiple failed reinterpretations. That eventually ended up creating Christianity. So Christianity is actually a product of, it's another attempt to fix a broken, failed prophecy. And so that's why Daniel is really important. They need that to be true, because if Daniel's a forgery, then the whole basis originally for Christianity kind of goes away. It also creates the problem that if you're admitting that Christianity was started by a forgery, and if you're admitting that Christians revere a book that has forgeries in it, that undermines the whole religion, because it's, well, what else is unreliable? What else is fallible? What else is a human creation in this? So Christians really desperately need their Maccabees.
You also bring up Maccabees wholeheartedly supports Daniel as if it's authentic. So now you've got
and it's the first right, and that's the first time we hear of the book outside of the book, right? So it's conveniently right. It's created by propaganda for the Maccabees, and then immediately in Maccabean propaganda literature, they're plugging the book, right? Yeah, so it's it's like social media. It's like, okay, we've created our fake news now. let's promote the fake news in our other channels. Basically, is what's going on there.
Wow.
So that's the role of that. So that's the impact of it. And then of course you get into the evidence as to how we know this. How did we figure this out, basically? And it is the mainstream view. I have to say, like, that's why I say how we know rather than is, because the mainstream consensus is solidly on this. Like, only fundamentalists, only literalists, only desperate, hardcore believing Christians are against this conclusion. All the mainstream scholars, all the mainstream literature, all the mainstream commentaries and the academic peer-reviewed commentaries, they all agree it's a forgery. The evidence is overwhelming in this case. So it's one of the clearest cases we have.
Interesting. Look, you go through so much detail, and I took lots of notes because I said, there's no way I'll remember to actually go into some of these things and to have you maybe elaborate.
Mm-hmm.
For those who haven't read his article, maybe it'll be good to have you kind of touch on some of these details. I really recommend they go read it, but if they just don't go read it, at least they can see this and actually know what the arguments are for Daniel being a forgery. The first thing I'd like to ask, though, number one, let's start with the Jeremiah thing real quick. You did mention that he had a 70-year prophecy. This is happening back during the exile time, that, hey, after 70 years, you'll come back into the land. This is the idea, or at least God's going to keep his promise and do these things.
Yeah.
However, according to this logic, it takes till the 2nd century BC to kind of backdate and say, we're fixing this problem because for hundreds of years, this hasn't fulfilled. So they're correcting a failed prophet named Jeremiah.
Yeah.
And they're keeping him as their good. We got to keep Jeremiah on our side.
Yeah.
Even though Jeremiah is fighting with other prophets during his own time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And these guys get killed by the Babylonians because he's saying, look, and I just did this with Dr. Kip recently, Dr. Kip Davis. He said, look, Jeremiah is like talking about these false prophets. They're talking about, we're going back to the land. And Jeremiah is saying, plant your vineyard. Do not try and mess with these dudes. Sure enough, whichever prophet, I guess, was on the right side of history, just like Josephus, they're the right guys. They're the guys you thumbs up because they're the ones who are correct. It's like a guessing game. But anyway, Daniel's fixing this problem. Daniel fixes, and he thinks the world's going to end in his day, or at least something's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that's who are we talking about? The fictional character or the authors? I think the authors didn't really believe that the end was going to transpire. That they wanted people to believe that. Like, that's how you inspire people to war, to fight harder, and so on. So they definitely wanted people to believe that, but they obviously knew they were lying. They were making this up. So it wasn't like they thought that this was a genuine rescue of the Jeremiah prophecy. And they might have thought that maybe the Jeremiah prophecy could be rescued this way. And then they just inferred rather than knew what that meant, right? And so the rest is like, well, we think it's going to be this, but we're going to sell it as a vision from the angel Gabriel, right? And I, in my book, Not the Impossible Faith, I have a whole chapter 10 of that, where I go into the anthropology of this. This is how you sold ideas back then. The idea of selling ideas with evidence and reason, like you come up and make a valid argument for it. That's actually an invention of the Greeks, right? Like they started that notion. Before that, and even outside that, concurrent with it, most people were very suspicious of that method. You had the idea like, well, we think it's just trickery. Rhetoric is just tricks. So they're very suspicious of the elite, reason-based, evidence-based mode of persuasion. Most people bought the divine revelation. So you said, if God said it, right? And so you would come out and you would say, God told me this. And then if you demonstrate through your moral character and a charisma and things like that you must have God on your side, then people say, yes, God must have said this to them. And so that's how you sell things. Right. That's an example of this phenomenon where people are more trusting, ironically, or have been up until recently, are more trusting of a visionary prophet who comes and says God told them something. And so you have to couch it as a revelation. It's the book of Revelation is another example that is completely fake. No such vision, I'm sure, occurred. Like someone asked me like how we know that, and you can look at the structure of it. It's very long and it's very elegantly literarily constructed. Visions don't work like that. That is a work of fiction, and it was designed to sell a particular political point of view. But that's how you package it. You said I was taken up to heaven and God told me these things. That's like, how you sold it, right?
Did you ever read did you ever read those books? They're not academic, but it's a divine revelation of heaven, a divine revelation of hell. This lady takes you, like, it's a whole book down to the details of how many heads were on the dogs, how many demons had pitchforks. Like, and you're thinking, how do you remember all of these details? Duh, Jesus, the Holy Spirit taught me. Like, it's like, come on. So I'm with you. Real quick, shout out to Jonathan Sheffield.
Yeah, I was gonna say that myself. Yeah. Hey, Jonathan, how's it going? Yeah, Jonathan's a good guy. I like hanging out with him and talking to him.
He is a good guy. You've debated him a couple times, and of course, he's the guy. The YouTube channel, I ask you guys to go check out. I don't care if you disagree with him. Go there. His graphics and stuff are amazing, and it's good to know the counter arguments of things, as well as Constellation Pegasus for giving me that super chat earlier. He said he's excited about this show here. Jehovah's Witnesses have a book on Daniel and kept me motivated for years. I'm very interested in this talk, he said. Okay. So this is important for so many reasons, what you're talking about here, Dr. Carrier. And I think the first question we need to ask is, who the hell is Daniel? Does Daniel even exist? And you mentioned something about a Ugaritic name for Daniel. He's similar to these fictional characters like Noah and Enoch.
Yeah.
Is he someone found in the Mesopotamian literature as well? Like,
yeah,
what is that?
I mean, so basically, yeah, in the same way Noah is, right? So most people are more familiar with Noah as a character who's a ripoff of Babylonian Sumerian heroes. So the whole flood myth, right, is just right out of Gilgamesh and other related flood myths. It is an adaptation of it. And so Noah is just a reiteration of previous mythical heroes who did the same thing Noah does in the story, right? So that this is definitely a pre-Israelite thing, that the Israelites just created their own version of the myth, right? So that's people are usually more familiar with that story. They're usually less familiar with the fact that Job is clearly has a precedent in Jobab, which is another pre-Israelite. And notably in Job, the book of Job, Job is not depicted as an Israelite. He is a foreigner. And in fact, is a foreigner of the roughly the same culture and cultural region as Jobab that he's based on. So that's a fictional mythical character, right? And then there's Daniel, and Daniel is a similar kind of like a clever, wise guy, a judge. Wise guy, not wise guy, and a good judge of people and things like that. So for Daniel to be ported into the Jewish pantheon, essentially the Jewish mythology, is another example of, it's just like what happened with Noah, just like what happened with Job, right? So, and when Ezekiel is the first one to reference Daniel, and he lists three men as the great wise men of yore, and he lists Daniel, Noah, and Job, and so that's a dead giveaway. These are all foreigners. They're all sort of mythical heroes. They exist in a mythical time. They're not historical persons. And Ezekiel knows nothing about this Daniel being a contemporary of his. He knows nothing about him being Jewish, knows nothing about him being a prophet. So the earliest reference to Daniel is of the foreigner, basically. So when there are probably lots of stories circulating around this mythic hero, the same way there was for Utnapishtim and the other pre-Noah characters, right? That get changed and evolved and attached to the Israelite version of it. So there may have been myths developed over time, over hundreds of years, after Ezekiel, attaching more like co-opting as a Jewish hero, attaching stories to him, or picking up the old stories from the other culture and then Judaizing them and so on. That's possible. We don't know, because there's no like continuous record to show us what was going on in these hundreds of years. But ultimately, yes, I lead with this. I only do one paragraph on it, and then I don't bring it up again, or at least except by reference, because I don't think this is the key argument. Like this isn't the reason we conclude Daniel is a forgery. But it is a piece of evidence that we need to take into consideration, that you're being a little gullible and trusting that there even was a Daniel. Right. So it is important to look at this history, because we have the precedents of a lot of the Old Testament is really just rewrites of pre-Israelite religious cultural myths and stuff. And so Daniel's appears to be a part of that tradition, although it's a later addition to it.
I think the Prince of Persia was literally just trying to fight us right now with your internet connection, but Gabriel won out.
It.
Let's hope he can continue to win out for this interview here. Because
what did I lose? What dropped? I didn't notice a hiccup.
I think they caught it, but it was like so close. It was like almost 21 days. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And but we're fasting still, so don't worry, we're good. Dennis R. Lecker, thank you for the super chat. Just a shout out for the content, Derek. Regards to Dr. Carrier, of whom I am a fan. Many people watching, of course, are definitely big fans. And Jim Majors is in the comment section. He's the gentleman. You need to go subscribe to his channel, which is Jim Majors, YouTube. And he's a PhD student on this specific topic. So he knows a thing or two. Which manuscript family does Dr. Carrier prefer to use and why? LXX, Masoretic, etc. How does it affect his interpretation of Daniel 9?
Yeah, I don't really have an opinion on that. I for this I rely on Daniel experts, so I'm going by what's in the commentaries. The Hermeneia commentary is like a prominent one. I follow Andrew Lecoq, for example, and I look at the experts on this because I'm actually my expertise is in Greek and Hellenistic, not in Hebrew or Aramaic. So I have to rely on the experts in Hebrew and Aramaic for anything that I say about those things. So that stuff is not coming from me. That's coming from other experts who are experts in that stuff. So I don't rely necessarily on any particular manuscript family. I look at what reconstruction amongst all of them are the scholars relying on, or if there's a dispute, then I either don't use it or I mention the dispute if that's the case, right? As to which manuscript to count on and so on. And so there's a lot of like disputes as to what exactly is in Daniel 9, even from like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which have lots of holes in them and scraps, so that frustratingly there's pieces where we'd want to see what actual letter was this exact spot, and it's missing, so we can't answer the question. So there's a lot of frustrating questions about reconstructing the exact text of Daniel. What I do is I just rely on the broad strokes and what we can reconstruct reliably, and not rely on things that are uncertain, essentially.
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that super chat. Real quick, Jim, Steven Sorensen, he says, how do you define, Dr. Carrier, how do you define forgery? And then before you answer that, Dragons and Genesis podcast, which has interviewed you before as well, he says Dr. Carrier is an android, and the recent voice distortion proves it. So everybody watching, like, this is evidence he's not really a human. You're not even real. Thank you for the super chat, though. Seriously, how do you define forgery before we even get to showing what it is?
Yeah, I follow Bart Ehrman on this. He wrote his book, Forgery and Counter-Forgery, which is the peer-reviewed academic version of his popular book, Forged. It's a really excellent study on ancient forgery. It's probably the best, and it is actually the best study of ancient forgery that you'll find today. It means a text that is written deliberately as if coming from a person who did not actually write it. So I don't count as a forgery a book that's anonymous. So like if it's not claiming to be by anyone, then it's not necessarily a forgery. If it's claiming to have been written in a particular time that it was not, even if there's not a name attached to it, that's still a forgery because you're basically pretending to be an author you are not, even if you're not claiming whose name it is. So a forgery is basically pretending to be the author that you're not, and expecting to get away with it, right? So it's not like an exercise in fiction. So that's what I call a forgery.
And ultimately, for anyone who hasn't read that book, Dr. Ehrman shows in antiquity, this was not like a thumbs up thing to do. This was actually frowned upon, very negative. It was not a common practice. It was not good. And he goes extensively into this in his book.
Yeah,
by the way, Mark,
very well done. Yeah.
Thank you for the super chat, but we're going to get this question at the end. If you want to super chat your question in the vein of the dialogue on Daniel and pertaining to the subject matter we're discussing, feel free to. I will reserve these super chats. Don't get me wrong. I'll make sure I get your question asked for super chatting at the end. But let's reserve it on the topic of Daniel as a forgery and how this has influenced these topics. And I'll make sure I get it. I screenshot your question, though. So, all right. Dr. Carrier, let's move into something here. If someone lived contemporary to the events taking place in Babylon, they would have never made this many historical mistakes. This is almost verbatim what you said in your article.
Yeah.
Darius the Great versus Cyrus the Great. Can you give us some details as to what, like, it's almost like someone in the cabinet of our current president not knowing what the president actually did or does or anything like that. So can you go into the details of what happened that makes you go, what? this does, like, how can you say he lived when he's saying he lived? Anyway.
Right. And I discuss like the different sides of this argument too in the article, if people want to go in there, like the attempt to say like, well, Herodotus got things wrong. Do we say that Herodotus is a forgery? And the reason we don't is because the things Herodotus gets wrong are things we expect him to get wrong. Like there are things that he's not a direct witness to, that he's getting to secondhand, third-hand hearsay, and so on. But what we're talking about, Daniel, the author, purports to be an actual top-ranking official in the Babylonian and then Persian kingdoms at the time that this events are going on. That person could not possibly make all these mistakes. Like the mistakes are just too numerous, too extreme, and are largely like they're hard to explain in any plausible way. Like you can come up with just so stories to explain them away, but they're not probable. They're not plausible stories for why it is. Whereas he gets a lot of things wrong, and they're the kinds of things you would expect someone to get wrong who's writing hundreds of years after the fact and doesn't have history down really well, which is expected at that time because history books, like really good spot on history books, were not quite a thing yet. When this, like they were just like, it was the practice of history in this sense had just been invented, right? In the 4th or 5th century, and it had only gotten better a few hundred years later in the Greek world. So the idea of Daniel like being able to find a reliable Babylonian, Persian historical record with lots of good data, like that kind of stuff just wasn't easily available back then. So it was easy to get things wrong. And because he's not a contemporary of the event. So he does. And then he has this whole long, like chapter 11, where he has this whole long prediction of the future from, Daniel's perspective, from the 5th and 6th century BC, predicts the next several hundred years. And as you go through this prediction sequence, the details get more reliable as you get closer to the last 10 years of the reign of Antiochus, and then get everything wrong just before and after his death, right? So like it's super accurate, and also gets more detailed, right? So the details get more specific and get super accurate and reliable in accounting events in that last 10-year period. So if you're looking at like gets everything wrong in the past, gets everything right in this 10-year period, and then gets everything wrong after that 10-year period, that's a dead giveaway for when the book was written, right? So like we know, like, come on, like the probabilities are hugely weighted because of this. That is when they wrote. They wrote probably towards the end of that decade. They wrote not quite in 165. They had to have written sometime in 164 because they predict a war. They predict that Antiochus was going to go into Africa and conquer a bunch of Africa, and that didn't happen. So the last part of Antiochus's life went differently than they predicted it would go, because they did not foresee a particular historical event, which is that Antiochus probably would have conquered a lot of Africa, except Rome did not want that to happen. And basically, so the Romans sent an ambassador that basically told him, like, yeah, if you do that, we're coming after you. Like that's you're done, basically. You're cooked. So here's the line: you do not cross this. And it was like, they didn't send troops or anything. They sent the ambassador just to tell him this. And he says, well, all right. Because he knew, like, there's a lot of backstory there. Like the story of Pyrrhus, from which we get the Pyrrhic victory. It was a famous story by this time. And the term Pyrrhic victory is a victory that you won, but it cost you so much you may as well have lost. Well, that comes from Pyrrhus, who was another one of the successors of Alexander the Great, who tried to conquer Rome. He tried to conquer Italy and stuff in the West. And he went and he invaded Italy. The Romans sent a legion. He wiped out the legion. And so the Romans sent 2 legions. And so he wipes out those 2 legions. And so the Romans raise and send out 3 legions. And I think he barely narrowly defeats those legions. But then he famously quipped the line, it's like, one more victory against the Romans and I'm done for. It was the thing, right? So it's like, so he failed, like he didn't succeed. And so this created this sort of legend of undefeatable Rome, basically. So don't piss off the Romans was the basic message of it. So when Antiochus gets this ambassadorial message, so he retires his whole plan to invade Africa, and no one could have foreseen that. Like the authors of Daniel just did not foresee that Rome would do this, basically. And so this intervening event, so it shows that this isn't a prophet writing this book. This is someone who knew those 10 years really well, made that up as a prediction, then tried to guess at what was coming up next and got it wrong. And tried to get right what happened in the past and got it wrong. And so that's how we know that. Now, I noticed earlier in the comment feed, someone did mention, or no, it wasn't the comment feed. It was in on Facebook comments on your post announcing the show. Someone did mention that there's 2 sections of Daniel. There's chapter 1 to 6 and chapter 7 to 12.
I think that can go into this question too, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Thank you for the super chat too, because he's
that fits perfectly,
book,
right?
Yeah, is the entire book of Daniel a forgery or some chapters? Maybe you can give us.
Yeah, I do go into this. I have a paragraph on it in my article for people who want to go into it more. But the answer is yes, it's all a forgery. But it might not have all been made by the same person at the same time. So the first 6 chapters, there is a case to be made. It's not a decisive case, but it's an intriguing case. Like I think it's a plausible argument. I don't know if it's conclusive, but it's plausible that the first 6 chapters were forged in the 4th century BC, which is still a couple hundred years after the fact. It's still not really Daniel. So it's someone pretending to be Daniel telling these stories for some other purpose that we don't know, because we know less about the historical context at that time. And then the chapters 7 to 12, those are very clearly originated in the 2nd century BC. So if the first 6 chapters were forged in the 4th century, then the next 6 chapters were forged in the 2nd century. So it's still all a forgery, but it's basically, you think of it as 2 separate forgeries that got stuck together. And we have a lot of examples of those kinds of things happening. Daniel, they kept sticking more forgeries onto Daniel. So you have Bel and the Dragon, you have Susanna, you have all these other. Daniel kept growing. People kept forging more Daniel and adding it on. So the idea of like it accumulating more and more forgery over time is already established precedent. We already know for a fact that was happening to Daniel a lot. Wow. So yes, it's still a forgery, but it is possible that the first section was forged a few centuries earlier. But if you want to go into that more, there's a lot of good writings on this, commentaries and so on, that cover the reasons why we suspect that might be the case.
Thank you, Dr. Carrier. My good friend Stephen says, if the Qumran sect considered Daniel to be authoritative, making at least 8 copies, did they have no way to determine that it was a recent forgery?
Well, to an extent, no. Like, how would you without modern forensic methods? In ancient times, generally the only method you see for people just determining something as a forgery is stylistic analysis. And they had a primitive form of stylistic analysis. We have much more advanced computational stylistic analysis now, but they had a primitive form of it a classic example is Hippocrates. Tons of Hippocratic literature was forged, and this is a big problem in the medical community. They were really annoyed by this. Well, some defended it as no big deal, but others saw it as a serious problem. And the way they would tell is if they would pick what was the most reliable, like the earliest attested Hippocratic texts, and they have a consistent style. So you say, well, okay, this is clearly written by one author. The best bet it is Hippocrates because it clearly comes from that time. And then they would find forgeries that are written in a different style, and they say, well, this is clearly not written by that guy, so this is therefore a forgery. So that was the way they did it. Now, you couldn't do this with Daniel because there's no previous Danielic literature. And ironically, even if you had the first 6 chapters still floating around, they're in a different language than the next 6 chapters, right? So the stylistic analysis is kind of blocked there, right? Like you can't really do stylistic analysis from Hebrew to Aramaic, or at least you could today, but back then they didn't have the skills or knowledge for how to do that effectively. But method is a separate question. Would they even want to? That's the more important question. I don't think they would have any interest at all in testing whether it was a forgery. And this is the big problem you have with apologetics throughout history, from even the most ancient of times all the way up to now, is that, and I've been talking about this last month, a lot of my articles are about this, is the idea that apologetics is actually specifically designed to avoid discovering the truth about things. It's designed to specifically justify things you want to believe. So it's clear that the Qumran community wanted to believe that Daniel was an authentic scripture, so they would never have bothered. They would never have dared test whether it was a forgery. If they would do anything about it, they would write treatises, apologetic treatises, defending it as authentic, right? Against anyone who would accuse it as being a forgery. But there wouldn't have been anyone accusing it of it being a forgery who wasn't on the other side of the Civil War, in other words, the losing side of the Civil War. So no one's going to be listening to them if they're even alive at this point, right? So, so they're just we don't have newspapers. We don't have letters to the editor of this battle over the authenticity of Daniel at the time of the publication. We don't get to hear the conversations. We don't get to hear what people
in
are
light
saying
of the fact that it's trying to give an optimistic look for their people. It's like me and you hearing really good news about us in a very bad situation, and we're gonna, you know what, this is a fake news. Like, you want to believe it.
It's more like the fake news that comes out of OAN or Fox now, right? Like people just believe it like gospel, even though it's actually a lot of it's bogus, because they want to believe it. It's important for them that it be true. And Daniel was a crucial text legitimizing the Maccabean and Hasmonean reign. So the Jewish elite, priesthood and political elite, definitely backed its authenticity because they needed to. Their legitimacy rested on it being an authentic document. So it had the full backing of the elite, including the most, would have had the backing of the most prestigious priests and so on. So yeah, it would be very unlikely to find a sect who was still around after that war that would be against the authenticity of Daniel. So the question is about the Dead Sea Scroll sect. Like, clearly they bought this as authentic, and they would have had no interest in trying to find out if it wasn't. Like, it would not have even occurred to them as a thing to admit to or look into.
I think this is so interesting. Real quick, Dragons in Genesis is asking, you have any recommendation on books and articles to help us understand Daniel? Something
yes. I cite many, in fact, the best ones in my article itself, and with links sometimes. So right early on, I talk about which commentaries are the best ones. The Hermeneia commentary, I think, is a really good one if you can get a hold of it. I think the Hermeneia commentaries tend to be expensive, but when public libraries open up again, you can usually get them through interlibrary loan if they don't already have a Hermeneia set. And I recommend to people, like, if you just in general, like, there are often, if you find a seminary that you can get to, now pandemic may have changed everything, but normally, and possibly in future when things return to normal, seminaries often have open libraries. Like, anybody can come in and use their library. You can't check things out necessarily. They're research libraries, so you have to leave things there. But I use seminaries all over the country to do work on this. So, like, they'll have all the commentaries, right? Both bogus and the best, right? So all kinds of stuff. So good journal collections in religious studies and in Christian apologetics and so on. So seminaries are a thing to look at. See if there is a library in a seminary near you that is open to the public. If you want to do this kind of looking up things, like if you want to check the best commentaries on the Bible, and those commentaries cost $100-200 if you're going to buy them. But if you want to just go peruse them, there might be a seminary around that has them. But even if not, your local public library can interlibrary loan it for you from anywhere in the world. So but that's what I recommend to people who want to dive into this, unless you're going to bankroll it. Like, you go buy the books, if you're that interested. But anyways, yeah, so best articles, best books, they're listed throughout my article on my website. So that's the best place to go.
Thank you so much. Appreciate the super chat. Dragons in Genesis, go subscribe. Check it out, ladies and gentlemen. I need to ask you this one here. Maybe you could spend a little time giving us the detail. You do this in your article, and I know that this is just kind of recapping in a way, but there's also things you're going to mention that you don't say in your article, I'm sure.
Yeah, of course.
You talk about the Satrap. I hope I'm saying that right. Satrap. That King Cyrus
Satraps. Yeah, the satraps.
Okay, explain what that is, because when I read that, I don't even know.
It's a Persian term, so it doesn't correspond to any English word.
Can you tell me what that is and what the problem is with the whole Darius the Great, Cyrus the Great, who made it?
So a satrap means governor. In the way that the Romans, they would assign proconsuls as governors of provinces. And we today would use the word governor. So we'd say that so-and-so is the governor of Syria, or so-and-so is the governor of Spain under the Romans. The Persian word is satrap, but it just means governor, basically. It's someone that you appoint to run a province. So that's all it means. And the question about the satrapies, the provinces, is how many there were and who created them. And in historical reality, Cyrus the Great, who actually was the Persian conqueror who set this whole system up, he started the idea of satrapies and satraps. Darius the Great, who was several successions later, he was not the successor to Cyrus, but there was a few other kings in between, but eventually then Darius the Great took over. And then he did an important reorganization of the satrapies that made the history books with some confusion as to the details. And so the author of Daniel just point blank says Darius created the satrapies, which is not an entirely accurate way to put it. And also it incorrectly states the number of satrapies. It says 120 of them, but there were not even more than 24, really. So it gets the number of satrapies wrong. It gets wrong the exact history of how they were developed and who made them and so on. But it makes sense for someone to like confuse these things, and confusing Darius the Great with the important thing is Darius the Great did do an important reorganization of this. So his name was associated with this development. So when Daniel says Darius the Mede did this, that's the clue that they have mistaken Darius the Great for Darius the Mede, which is there's no such thing as Darius the Mede. It's a fictional character. They've got confused, I think, possibly on purpose, because there's a prophecy about how the Medes would conquer Babylon, and that didn't happen. It was the Persians. So I think whoever's authoring Daniel might have deliberately made Daniel a Mede and argued for him being a Mede in order to also satisfy the prophecy, right? It's kind of like inventing history to satisfy the prophecy. It's like inventing the nativity to make Jesus fit prophecies of the birth of Messiah, right? Like it's all fake history, but it's not real history, but it's designed to satisfy prophecy. It's possible that Darius the Mede was invented as a character for that, and he's based on Darius the Great. So they've conflated different rulers, and they've basically made Darius the Great into Darius the Mede, and then changed when he reigned, and then changed the exact details of what he did, and in order to fit their narrative of what they wanted to sell. Some of that might have been just historical error. Some of it might have been deliberate.
I think in your apologetics section of the article, you mentioned something about the canon being closed potentially in the 5th century BC, and that this would be the reason why someone who's writing this might try to push us back into the 6th century and act like, no, this was before everything was like closed.
It's important to get that distinction correct. The idea of closing the canon did not occur in the 5th century BC. It occurred probably right around the time that Daniel is, or possibly a century before when Daniel was forged. So we're talking like 3rd century BC, maybe. The idea started arising in the 3rd, maybe 2nd century BC. The idea started arising that anything written after the 5th century couldn't be scripture. It could only be man-made human stuff. And so the idea, that's hundreds of years later. And so they kind of like blocked the canon then, right? And they said anything after 5th century, we're not going to count as scripture. Now, there was no official decision. This wasn't like something someone just said. Right. It was just a general sense of like this idea. Eventually it coalesces a few more centuries later into an actual doctrine. But that was like after even the Second Jewish War, like the Roman Jewish War. But the idea was floating around the time of Daniel. So the idea was there that anything that claimed to have been written after the 5th century would be suspect, right? So in that atmosphere, yes, of course, you're going to create a document that purports to be written in the 6th century or 5th century to be conveniently meet the deadline. So that there is a causal explanation there that fits, and so I think that makes sense of it.
So you're telling me Daniel did not predict the Roman-Jewish War? How the heck did he not do that?
Yeah, I know apologists want this to be the case, but you really have to twist the original context and to get it to fit that way, basically.
So, I mean, this is a valid point, because you mentioned Onias III. I believe I saw Jim Major's comment that there were 2 priests mentioned in, was it Daniel 9 where this is mentioned, or 11, or?
Well, anointed, let's be clear.
Anointed,
yeah. So it using the language of prophecy, which is always deliberately vague, so you can match more things. It sounds like prophecy if you're not hyper specific, right? So they try to use these vague terms like, the prince and the anointed, and like, what do you mean exactly? And it's like, well, you know what we mean, but so that sounds more authentic as prophecy if you use these vague terms. So anointed, and anointed, like priests were considered anointed, so they were Christ's in that sense, because they were priests and kings were often considered anointed people. So that was a legitimate way to refer to a priest, and to call the principal anointed. that is just sort of like prophecy speak for chief priest, high priest, right? So yeah, that's going on there. But in the mathematics in Daniel 9,
that's what I was going to ask you to get into.
It refers to two anointed figures, and so it kind of links them with two different overlapping periods of time. One is a 49-year period of time. One is a 434-year period of time. And why they're doing this, you got to read my article to understand why they're trying to make the Jeremiah prophecy work. All this legerdemain they had to do to get it to work, to make it sound impressive, and so on. And in fact, this shows that they're writing for this period. Like they're writing for the Seleucid period because they tried so convolutedly hard to get this Jeremiah prophecy and to explode out all this complicated math to try and get it to fit Onias. And it does exactly fit Onias, right? But there's two periods. The one is the 434 years, which fits Onias. And then the other is the 49-year period. And so there's still dispute in the commentaries as to which anointed that one refers to, right? And in my opinion, the math works out. The exact 49-year period works out for Cyrus the Great. And we know Cyrus the Great was considered an anointed. He was considered the Messiah because he rescued the Jews, basically. He restored the temple and so on. So they actually gave him sort of honorary messianic status. And we know this is in the Bible, right? It actually says this, right? So I think the first anointed is meant to be Cyrus. So it's the 49-year period between, I can't remember the final exile, the final event that exiled the Jews, which is 484 or whatever, in the 480s, when they were finally pulled out of Jerusalem and brought out of Israel, and in the exile. And 49 years later, Cyrus the Great comes in and conquers and issues his decree that it releases the Jews and returns them to their home and rebuilds their temple. And that 49-year period lines up with Cyrus the Great. So I think the first anointed, the authors intended to be a reference to Cyrus, and then the second one is to Onias. And the convoluted ways that works out is you have to read my article and then the commentaries that I'm basing it on. So.
Yeah, your article really deals with this issue bad. And I wanted to ask about this time gap that I think is important when people try to stretch us to the New Testament real quick. But Arian, my friend, actually has a super chat. I appreciate the super chat, brother. How do fundamentalist Christian scholars deal with the historical 2nd century BC mistakes? Now, in your article, you mentioned some of this.
Oh, yeah. The whole article is designed to address exactly what you're talking about, what Arjun is talking about, which is, yes, obviously they have elaborate just so stories to explain away all of this evidence, right? And to make it be an authentic text. And so I go into what those arguments are. And not only do I show why they're wrong, but I go into the general principle behind even making these arguments is illustrative of apologetics as a methodology. And so I go into like how this differs from history as a methodology. And so I use these as teaching examples of that. But I go into all of the main arguments that they try to pull. I mean, there's a variety. There's a whole ton of them. Like trying to get Darius the Mede to be someone else, right? For like they find another actual historical figure and say, well, that was Darius the Mede, and Daniel's talking about that guy. And like it doesn't really fit, doesn't really work. But it's what they try. And there's other things like they say, like really Nabonidus. Am I saying that right? I don't Babylonian here. I don't speak Babylonian, but Nabonidus was the father of Belshazzar. Belshazzar was just the regent for the actual king of Nabonidus. And so Daniel, the author of Daniel, doesn't know about Nabonidus, and he thinks Belshazzar was the king, and he also thinks Belshazzar was the son of someone else. Like gets these details wrong, and so fundamentalists will go in and try to come up with just so stories such that this could still be true, right? Like, so there's various excuses and ways that they try to get it to go and work out that way. And so if you want to see what those arguments are, and I even link to some of them, so you can actually go read the original apologetics themselves and not just take my word for it in my article. So you can go through detail by detail if you're interested in those things. But what I show in there is that none of them are historical logic. Like at no point do they actually argue like a historian. They're trying to rationalize a preconceived conclusion. And then coming up with just so stories to explain all the evidence without presenting any evidence that those just so stories are true or even probable. And that's the difference between apologetics and history. And that's I use the article to explain. I think it's useful for people to like see that distinction, so you can start seeing it in other arguments and other places for other things.
Thank you, Dr. Carrier. There's so much more we can add to that about this idea of cognitive dissonance, because I know I've experienced it before. So Steven's back at that $6.66. I appreciate it. Since
yeah, I love it.
Since Christians connected Onias III to Christ, Daniel 9, might they have also connected Michael's rising, Daniel 12, with Christ's resurrection?
This is an interesting question. So I think yes. Do I, at this moment, as I speak now, do I think I can prove it? No. So it is a suspicion that I have. And you know, the Jehovah's Witnesses actually do say this, right? They say that Michael is Jesus, like they've made that equation. But when I look at the text of Daniel, I think the authors of Daniel are making that equation. I think they're saying that the Messiah is, well, like they list three anointed. There are three princes, basically. You know, one is the Cyrus, one is Onias, and then the one that comes to enact everything, the end of the world, is Michael. But the way it's written, it sounds like there's an overlap between the last two anointed, so they're meant to be the same person. So like Michael is the return of Onias or something. I don't know. But when the Christians reinterpreted this, I do suspect the Christians thought that Daniel was saying that Michael and Jesus Christ are the same. And I have a footnote on the historicity of Jesus where I lay out why I suspect this, but it's only in a footnote. I never rely on it as an argument. So I don't use it as data, because it's not something we can prove. However, someone sent me a book recently it's in my stack of things, which is this book, which is a peer-reviewed book, Michael and Christ. This is actually good scholarly text that I haven't gotten into yet, but he explores this theory in detail, and I think he comes down on my side on this. So I'm super excited to go read that book and see if he proves the case, because I think that's what was really going on. And if you do that, you can actually draw a lot of other connections between Jewish and Christian theology. Once you've done that, once you've made the equation between Jesus and Michael, a lot of other stuff starts to make sense. And we know there were these esoteric teachings. So we know, like Ignatius talks about, there's some sort of complex angelology that's part of the secret mystery teachings of Christianity that he can't go into. Like he mentions it. There's a lot of other these kinds of parallels, these sort of secret teachings. And even before this, Judaism had this idea that the supreme archangel of archangels, who was the high priest of God's temple, is called the angel of many names, right? So so even they're admitting that there's this angel is represented in their literature under many different names. So they're starting to pile these angels together and equate them as one angel. And that happens to be the same angel that Paul is equating Jesus with in the epistles. And that's demonstrably true. I show that on the historicity of Jesus. That doesn't tie directly to Michael, but there is a root from there to Michael, because the angel of angels that Paul is linking Jesus to was also the high priest of God's celestial temple, the real temple, the true one in the seventh heaven. Michael in tradition is the high priest of God's celestial in some Jewish traditions around the same time. So you can draw the lines, right? So I think there's something there. I just, at this point, I haven't seen a proof of it, but it is a plausible theory. That's the same.
So real quick, I think this is a comment, but maybe we can address this after we're done with the Daniel focus. And thank you for the super chat too. Notice it's 616.
I was just going to say, someone is a real trivia hound there.
Someone is
the variant reading there, right?
Most common objection I get to forgeries in the New Testament Gospels being anonymous, Jesus not existing, is the people back then had no doubt about these things. So thank you for the super chat, my friend.
That's always a strange argument. It's like saying you go to a gullible person who just believes all kinds of crazy stuff, and then you ask them, why do you believe this stuff? And they say, because those gullible people over there believe it. That's not a good argument.
Well, because my ancestors believed it.
People, but believers had motivated reasoning. They believed things because they wanted to believe them, not because of evidence-based reasoning. That hadn't even been invented really until the Greeks started doing it. And the Christians and Jews are very suspicious of it as a methodology. Like it only sort of filtered into Christianity over time. Like it wasn't an original doctrine. In fact, they're very hostile to evidence-based reasoning. I have a whole chapter on this in The Scientist in the Early Roman Empire, which is my book on ancient
That
science
book,
for people who are
dude,
interested
that
in
book
that. So,
was so much. Oh my gosh, that book was so much on Audible.
it is a
wow.
thorough book. Yes, it's very thorough. But I have a whole section in there on the anti-intellectualism of the early Christian movement. And that it softened over time, but originally, like, they were very, very antithetical to what we would call critical thinking and evidence-based reasoning. They saw it as more demonic, as something untrustworthy.
Wow.
Like, how dare you question? Right, is the attitude. So when people
Who are
like
you,
back
oh
then
man, to answer
believe
back to
these-
God? Right?
Yeah, people who believe these things, they believe them because they want to, not necessarily because there was good evidence to believe them. And so you find I have a lot of articles on my blog about showing how Christians just back then just made up stories, and then people just believed them. Like they shouldn't have. There wasn't any good reason to believe them, but they just did because they wanted to. It sounded right. And so that's how people thought back then. So that isn't reliable. Another side of this is that all the people we could have consulted who would have fact-checked these things, we don't get to hear from them. Like, none of their books are preserved, or even if they wrote books, right? So like, if anyone questioned this stuff, we don't know what they said. We don't know what they found. Because that stuff wasn't preserved, it wasn't in the interests of medieval Christians to preserve any of that stuff. So we don't know, right? So like, you can't say that, well, no one gainsaid it, no one challenged it. And so, well, actually, they might have. We don't know. We don't have the books and literature that would tell us whether or what. So we can't make statements about what wasn't said at any given time.
Thank you, Dr. Carrier. Constellation Pegasus, thank you, my friend. I forgot about Jehovah's Witnesses saying Michael is Jesus. Happy I forgot about that. Yeah, this channel is great. Thank you so much, man. I appreciate it. And then Black Lion Supreme, my friend from the Dagger Squad team, which you were on the Dagger Squad, of course.
Yeah.
Hello, Derek and Dr. Carrier. Is it true that the last consensus on historical Jesus was done in the 1920s? And what is the source of the criteria of reliability? Thank you both. Now we're going off into historicity.
We're going off into other things.
But
That's true.
can I add to that and just say that I was trying to use Daniel when I interviewed Dr. John J. Collins to kind of ask Dr. Collins, like, do you think this angelic Christ figure could, because he believes that the Son of Man in Daniel, one that looks like the Son of Man, he said he wouldn't look like if he really was a human. He says he thinks it's an angel. That's why it says he looks like a Son of Man, and tries to get over into the New Testament. Anyway, address his super chat. Thank you for the 10. But you know what I mean? I tried to see what he said. And he said, no, that didn't happen. So,
so two things here on this one. So the consensus has been around, since then. But what I think is being referred to here is the last time a peer-reviewed book was written specifically defending the historicity of Jesus as a axiom, right? Ever since then, it's been an axiom. No one has really written a book defending it. They just assume it's the case and then argue for a particular kind of historical Jesus. That's what most literature has been since then. But the last book that even addressed the historicity issue, I should say the last peer-reviewed academic book, like last not amateur, like serious address of this debate, and it came out on the side of historicity. The last one made was 1923. And that's Shirley Jackson Case wrote the classic book, and that's just been repeated over and over again. People will either keep citing that book or will cite people who cite that book, and that's it. They just keep citing. There's this endless line of citations that ends at Shirley Jackson Case 1923. No one has really done a proper peer-reviewed defense of historicity, and the only books that have been peer-reviewed that have addressed historicity are both now on the side of non-historicity. So it's high time for the field to wake up and actually do a proper peer-reviewed book that actually addresses the two peer-reviewed books against, so that we can finally have a good, best case for historicity. I want to see this. I thought Did Jesus Exist by Bart Ehrman would be this, but it's not a peer-reviewed book. It's kind of like something he just wrote off the seat of his pants really quickly, and it's really sloppily argued and really sloppily constructed. I was shocked and surprised by this. It's different from a lot of his other work, and that is poorer quality than his other work. He doesn't like it when I say this, but that's it's just true. And if people want to see this, I actually demonstrate this in my article, Bart Ehrman Recap. So people go to that article, they can see I itemize 31 points where he's just not following sound methodology or even saying true things, which is alarming. Wow. But that's it, right? And then there was Casey came out with another non-peer-reviewed popular market almost like a tabloid trash book. And so no one has really done a serious treatment of this in a proper sense, right? Of really analyzing the pros and cons and coming out on either side or for historicity.
If I could say, just for those who are watching who might be historicists and whatnot, you literally cited Ehrman earlier about, so you're not like, you're not you don't have a chip on your shoulder toward the guy.
Right.
So
yeah, no, he produces good popular market summaries of consensus, of the mainstream consensus. Like Jesus Interrupted that is the book you should read. There's no better book to read if you want to catch up yourself to what is the mainstream consensus in Jesus studies, not the fundamentalist consensus, not, but what is the actual mainstream scholarly consensus on things. Even when he's wrong, even when the things he says in that book are wrong, they are at least they're accurately representing what the consensus is, right? So I think, so in that sense, the book is valuable, right? So if you want to know, so I always pair it with Bible Unearthed. The Bible Unearthed is the version of that for the Old Testament. By Finkelstein and Silberman. They wrote a book that's on the mainstream consensus regarding the Old Testament. And then, Ehrman has basically written the equivalent for New Testament studies. Those are two good books. And a lot of his other popular market books are good as well. But his peer-reviewed work is pretty solid. Like Forgery and Counter Forgery is an excellent work. As Orthodox Corruption of Scripture is another really good book that I recommend.
I enjoyed misquoting Jesus too. That was a really good one.
And that's another example where he's relaying what the mainstream consensus is. He's not doing some radical new thing. Like he's just saying, this is what we as scholars already know or think. This is not being communicated to the public. The pulpits aren't telling you. So he's writing books, communicating it. So he's done a very good service in doing that. I have issues a lot with his historical methodology. I think when he does it under peer review, he does a better job when he does his own historical reasoning. He's a much better textual critic. That's his actual field, is textual criticism. Like he's a master of that. He studied under Bruce Metzger, like the great Bruce Metzger, which is the greatest textual critic of the Bible in the 20th century. So he has nailed. Like that he usually has pretty well done. But as a historian, it's hit or miss, except for his peer reviewed work, which tends to be pretty good.
Thank you so much for that 10 Black Line Supreme. Aryan, thank you. Even your friend Tovia Singer admits that Daniel 1-6 were written by the Great Assembly. The Great Assembly apparently also wrote on behalf of Nebuchadnezzar. And I'm friends with everybody.
I don't know where any of this is coming from, but this always mystifies.
He's Orthodox Jew, by the way.
Yeah, there's no evidence for this. This is just a story someone is telling. There's no evidence for this at all. So that's an example of a just so story. Like people just start telling stories about how these books got written or whatever. But when you go look at the time, the actual centuries when these things were going on, these stories don't exist. There's no evidence for this. We can't really buy that.
Thank you, Dr. Carrier. Thank you, Aryan. Thank you so much. I hope I'm pronouncing your name with that J there. I'm not trying to say Arjan anymore. David Stevens says, Carrier is Jesus made flesh. You rock, Carrier.
All right, that's an exaggeration. Let's not get too crazy here.
Yeah, well, I appreciate. Thank you so much for the super chat, David. Throwing a whole 50 at me.
Nice.
Appreciate it, man. Do I need to take a clothing article off? I mean, what's up? Look, my friend, I read between the lines is his name. He actually wrote me. He's like, Derek, it's literally read and between lines. And I was like, awesome. So thank you for the 10, man. Good look. I appreciate it. Always looking out for your friend here, man. Thank you. If Christianity was a mystery cult, okay, here we go. We're getting off track here. So I'm going to screenshot this, Indo, and we're going to deal with this in just a moment when we finish up with Daniel, if that's okay. I just have a few more things I want to touch on, if that's okay. Daniel's use in Christianity.
Yeah.
Like, how do they calculate? Because you're the math guy. You're the Bayesian theory guy. You're the big, I can't even keep up with you on this Bayesian methodology of prior probabilities and stuff. One day maybe, but I just don't have that mathematics skill. The furthest I went is calculus in high school, and that was before I did many drugs in between then and now. And so I just have lost memory if it comes to that idea. So
and calculus is a completely different mathematical field. So
that's
literally theory. Yeah. So, but anyway, proceed. You were getting to Daniel. What?
Yeah, the math. Like, how did Christians? What did they do? How did they calculate this and say, look, we got to make sure this lands on Jesus in the 30s, and somehow it relates to the temple's destruction, especially when you look at Mark and stuff like that.
Yeah, you can easily find this online. There's a million internet pages where Christians are showing you this. But what they do is that, so the original authors in Daniel, they separate out a 49-year period and a 434-year period. So what Christians do is they don't separate them out. They take it as one continuous period of those sequentially. So that's one whole period of those together. And then they start looking for how to interpret, because it says the clock starts from the time the word went out. And so they can reinterpret, they can choose which word went out, right? Like which thing are we talking about here? Now, the authors meant when Jeremiah published his prophecy. That's clear from the context and the original intent of it. But if you can change that and say, well, it was like when the decree that Cyrus gave that freed the Jews, or you could pick a variety of different starting points, right? And then choose your calendar, because there's lunar calendar, there's solar calendar, there are different lunar calendars. And so what constitutes a year, you can dicker around with. And so you can convert one lunar calendar into a solar calendar and thus gets a few more years out of it. So you can really play around with how the math works out and get a date. And the date it lands in various places. There's a lot, the Christians who make these arguments often make mistakes in the arguments, but like mistakenly wrong starting point or wrong year, or adding the math wrong or whatever. So that you get a bunch of different results depending on what you plug in. But the results, when you do this particular Christian approach, come between like 28 and 38 AD, I think, somewhere in, like, it falls in that area. And some claim they can get exactly the 30 or exactly the 33 or something like that. That might be a little dodgy, but that's what they do. And so I did talk about this ages ago. It's on Secular Web, one of my articles on, Newman on prophecy. So my article on Newman on prophecy, which talks about the methodology of evaluating prophecy. So people who want methods on this will find that useful. Even though I wrote it ages and ages ago. It has a section on the 77's prophecy, and with footnotes that talk about how the math works and different ways to do the math. So we really want to dig into that, and that's not even complete. Like, there are more ways to arrange the math than the ones I even talk about. But the ones I talk about are the more popular ones. Like Julius Africanus is like the 3rd century Christian apologist who really is the first one to publish a version of this math. Right. So that's like the earliest version of it. But you can see my article on Newman on prophecy covers some of the angles on that.
It's interesting because, like, modern ideas, if you will, we saw Harold camping. How did he know, or what was he doing in his head to make him think that day? Like,
I never looked into that because I didn't care.
it would just be interesting in light of what you're saying. And in 1840 something, the Millerite movement, I can't remember exactly, but they thought 4,000 years or some calculation directly from a day. For whatever reason, this was going to be the day. What made them think that?
I mean, you could go into it and find a convoluted logic of some kind, and how they keep changing it. Yeah, these things just interest me, so I never really look into those details. There are a couple books, by the way, on apocalypticism. I can't remember their titles right now. I do reference them. I reference them in my Wichita talk, I think. So people want to look at. There are two good books that cover the whole history of predicting the end of the world. And so if you want to get a dive in on all the different ways that was done and why and so on, one or both of those books would be the way to go. I unfortunately, off the top of my head, I can't remember their names, but
you're not omniscient,
nor infallible. Yes. Yeah. My memory it has limitations.
Well, Sean, thanks a lot, man. I'll keep my shirt on just for you guys. I appreciate it. And thanks for the super chat. Look, Crossover Maniac, thank you for the super chat. Is there some parallels in the creation of the Gospel of Mark and the Book of Daniel? Do you see similarity in how they were created?
I don't know how to answer that. Literarily, perhaps.
I was going to say, can I add something to that? You know how the temple is destroyed and we see what we would call ex eventu, like it seems like it knows something already, even though it's putting it into the 30s. We know it was written after the temple's war, right? This destruction. However, there are this anticipation of the parousia and stuff that's supposed to come too. So some of this didn't happen and some of it did.
Yeah, that's a good point. That is one similarity, is that Mark is pretending Well, he doesn't really say when he's written. He's not pretending to be a particular person. He's not so Mark is not a forgery per se, because when it was originally published, it was attributed to nobody, and it nowhere in there says that they were a witness or they talked to a witness or anything. They just tell a story. They're like a bard with a lyre, and or a bard with a lyre, and they're just telling their story. That's how Mark is written. Mark is written very much in the classic model of myth at the time. The way you would just tell stories, the way storytellers would just tell stories, it's not written the way histories were written back then. So it's very much in that vein, and it's much more in the mythic biography genre. So it's different from Daniel. Mark has a lot of different literary models. So like Mark is using what we call the pericope model, but that's a word that's from biblical studies. When they weren't talking to classicists had their own word for it, which comes from the ancient rhetorical manuals, it's called crai, which is these are the same things where you tell a little unit of a story and then you stack these units together to tell a bigger story, and then even the arrangement of the units tells a story unto itself. So you have sandwiches and circular ring structure and so on. Mark is definitely using Greek rhetorical techniques in a way that the authors of Daniel did not. So I see more differences than similarities, but you can point to similarities. Obviously, Mark is aware of Daniel, so Mark is like riffing on Daniel in some ways. So there's a lot of different threads you could pick at in terms of what their connections are. But I wouldn't say that they're like strongly paralleled.
Revelation is, and the king below says you're the goat, no question. Just letting you know. And you know what that means, I'm sure by now, right?
No, I don't know what that means.
You do not know?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. That means you live on a farm. No, I'm just kidding. No, you're the man. Let's put it that way, bro. You're a beast. You're a beast. Okay. They don't want none. Nobody wants none of that. You know what I'm saying? Now the book of Revelation, I think we need to couple more points, and then I'd like to get into these other super chats. Any other questions? I don't give a crap what the question is. If you want to super chat it, you can. We got a couple on the side just because our time's running out, and you and me, like, time goes by so quick. So
yeah, I know, right?
The book of Revelation, we had a good question earlier, and it was just in passing, but it was irrelevant to the topic at that very moment when I didn't want to interrupt you. What is the political agenda of Revelation? It's using Daniel for sure. But what would you say is the political motivation to it, since Daniel's a political motivation and it's apocalyptic?
Yeah, right. So Revelation wasn't written to promote a war, for example. So it's definitely a different context. The best book on this was Elaine Pagel's recent book, Revelations, which is about the book of Revelation, where she goes into like what is the social agenda of the author, and I think broad strokes here, it is a critique of Roman imperial power. So a lot of what's going on in there is basically explaining what Rome is doing is immoral and bad and so on, and then predicting why God is going to take it all out. And it is predicting various other things that it wants to sort of like, it's one of those examples of getting people excited by the evangelism, getting excited to join the church and be saved because time is running out. So its political agenda is to bring in the flock. Now, the controversial part of this is that I think more scholars now agree, the author of Revelation is a member of the Torah observant sect of Christianity. So this is actually an anti-Gentile Christian thing. So it's actually saying only Jews are going to be saved. Is the Revelation is like the idea is like only observant Jews who are Christians are going to get salvation. It doesn't explicitly say that. It doesn't just outright say that, but it tells a sort of political narrative of how that's how they think it's going to go, and try to get people into the church, into specifically the Torah observant church, and thus, in other words, to convert to Judaism, and then become a practicing Christian within the Jewish tradition. So it's insofar as political, it's a critique of the secular political situation and a defense and advertisement for the sub-politics of the church. So that it's actually a political infighting between the different factions of the church. So it represents a particular faction in that battle of trying to control the narrative. And that's why it's very similar. Right. And that's very similar to Matthew, right? So Revelation and Matthew, really, they come from the same sectarian angle. And so there's a lot of overlap between those texts and vocabulary and concepts and stuff like that. So they really represent the same point of view.
Wow. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Carrier. That's one of the things I noticed in like the angel that comes to one of the churches in chapter 2. He's talking about, oh, you did some things right, but we're going to correct this issue. If you're practicing this, that, you're eating meat sacrificed to idols, stuff like that. And it's like, Paul taught that. I wonder if they're jabbing at a Pauline Christianity. Anyway. So Mark, thank you for the super chat. How do you interpret Psalms 82:6? I said, you are gods. You are all sons of the Most High. Dr. Carrier?
Oh, it's been ages since I've looked at that verse, so I don't really have an opinion on it right now. I have to go back and look at what my notes have said on studying that. So okay. I can't help you there right now.
Okay, and you don't want to get I get it. I don't blame you. GOAT means greatest of all time, by the way. And making sure you saw that.
I did not get. Boy, I'm definitely a noob when it comes to pop culture. Okay. What do we got next?
Thank you again for the 616. I think we already addressed this somewhat, but I said most common objection I get to forgeries. You already addressed this one. I just took a screenshot. Okay, cool. So then we're caught up on that. Okay, cool. Then we're gonna read between the lines here with my friend Richard. Do you think there is a realistic chance that a sitting professor will employ on the historicity of Jesus as a text for an upper level class or senior seminar?
Yeah, there's a chance someday. I don't know when, like probably not soon. But in let's say 10 years from now, if someone wants to teach a seminar on the historicity of Jesus, it's going to have to be OHJ and Lataster's book, right? Unless someone writes something else in between now and then. Those are the only peer-reviewed books that are the latest. And if they have, then throw in the other one, the next most recent one, which is Shirley Jackson Case's pro-historicity book. It's going to suffer by comparison. So I'm really hoping someone will produce a good historicity defense book that would be.
Why don't you write one? Why don't you play devil's advocate and actually
I can't. I really couldn't do that. I think it should be someone who actually believes in the conclusion or is taking it seriously, so that they, first of all, they have credibility. If I write a pro-historicity book, everybody will, dismiss it as tanking the case, right? Whereas if someone who's actually like on the fence or actually is pro-historicity, if they write it, that they'll have, coming from that, will have more credibility. And it also means that they will have the higher motive to like look for maybe arguments that I've overlooked, for example. And so I want to see someone who's either fence sitting or pro-historicity do it, and someone who has a PhD in a relevant field and who gets it through peer review and does it all correctly. I have like my dream list of who I'd want to write these things, but it doesn't matter. Like it doesn't have to be someone of particular prominence. It's just anybody who's qualified, and through any publisher that is a legitimate academic press. Like I want to see this happen.
Thank you, Dr. Carrier. My friend Dennis R. Lecker. Thank you for the super chat, Dennis. Appreciate it, bro. Love you, man. How might one respond to Bart Ehrman? And I do like him, Bart Ehrman's appeal to academic consensus when he argues that no person of consequence would answer the idea that Jesus did not exist.
Yeah. First of all, it's a bad argument. So this is an example of Ehrman relying on fallacious reasoning rather than sound historical argument. So it's a bad argument to begin with. And that's, even if it were true, it's factually false. So I list actually a dozen significant qualified historians who either agree with mythicism or who admit that it is plausible and worth considering. Who either agree or are agnostic, or who admit that it's plausible and worth considering. And I had linked, so that's in my Ehrman recap article. I think it's item 22. I have the whole list of these people with links to their credentials and links to their affirmation of taking it seriously. So his idea that no one would take it seriously, no one of consequence would take it seriously, is false. So the premise is false. But even if the premise were true, the argument is fallacious. This is not how consensus arguments should work. If someone publishes a peer-reviewed challenge to the consensus, it is a circular argument to cite the consensus against it. Right? Like the whole point of getting a challenge to the consensus through peer review is that now we need to review this argument. So you actually have to address the arguments as to why the consensus is wrong. You can't just keep citing the consensus. Like that is not a valid or legitimate methodology, and actually refutes and repudiates the entire point of consensus, right? The consensus is of no value if all it means is dogma. If it's just something we just, well, whatever the opinion is, we'll just cite it. It's not based on anything. It's not based on evidence. It's not based on argumentation. It can never be questioned. That's dogma, not consensus, right? So the only reason consensus is worth citing is that we're trusting that the scholars who are having this opinion have actually examined the arguments pro and con and have come to a conclusion that's informed and based on their professional understanding of the field. So the consensus is useless. It has no value if that's not happening. So when there's a challenge to a consensus, it does have to be addressed. And I do mean like a proper peer-reviewed challenge, not just some wacko on the internet coming up with stuff. Reference to the beginning of the show, there are a lot of amateur, terrible arguments for mythicism that are incompetent or badly argued and so on. And so it's very important to say, like, I don't think historians are obligated to address those. But a proper peer-reviewed study that's within the field methods and principles, yeah, you need to actually address the arguments. You can't just keep citing the consensus again. And so that's a fallacious argument, even if the premise were true, and the premise isn't even true. So, so we'll also see where things are 10, 20 years from now as well.
Well, since we've ran out of super chats, I have a little surprise for everybody watching. This is on Patreon. So if anyone has not joined it, you haven't seen this clip. You've probably seen it if you saw my Bart Ehrman interview, but I figure why not let you hear the horse's mouth say what he says when I ask him this and have you address it real quick. Yeah. If you have any super chats, feel free to, but we're going to go ahead and play this here and hope you could see this. Let me know if you can.
So far.
So that's really me, by the way, who beats Leviathan, in case anyone's wondering.
Oh, is that what that is? Okay, excellent.
100%. So here we go. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Hundreds of videos not released, early access. Join the Patreon. MythVision. Shameless. Another donor says, I have a special request. Dr. Ehrman, please blink twice if you're secretly a mythicist. Would you like to comment? You guys opened up even more.
I'm going to get some toothpicks. No, I think the mythicists are completely wrong. And and I think they're shooting themselves in the foot. Does everybody know what a mythicist is on your program?
Yeah, everyone, pretty much.
So, look, you're just doing yourself a disservice because people who are not mythicists are laughing at you. You're ignoring historical evidence in order to assert a point. And you might think it's great, but it's like, look, if you're a big fan of Fox News or of MSNBC, you think it's great. But anybody who's not, who listens, just says this is just crazy. And so, look, I'm a fan of MSNBC, but I'm a liberal, but the evidence is so overwhelming that I'm just like, why not argue something that is going to make a difference instead of like trying? So I know why people do it. They like to get a name from themselves, or they like to get a book published, or they like having a following, and then it's cool to say Jesus never existed, but it's just bollocks, to quote my English wife.
Could we, and by any chance, before we leave this one to the next question, is it possible to say that some of the academic mythicists aren't on the same playing field as some of the guys who are, let's say,
I'm trying to get him to budge.
Really, really, really out there theories that don't even go into the vein of academia at all. Like, for example, Dr. Richard Carrier, Dr. Robert McNair Price. Would they be, you don't equate them to Holocaust deniers the same way you would someone else, right?
Not generally.
Because, I mean, those guys,
they know a lot, but they're completely wrong on this. Have you seen my debate with Robert Price?
Yes.
So, I mean, I just think they're completely wrong. And Carrier, Carrier's a smart enough fellow, but I think he does himself a disservice. He knows a lot. He's published, he's published, an article or two in a peer-reviewed journal. He brags about how many things he publishes in peer-reviewed journals. But I mean, it's not like a big deal. This is what scholars do. But there's nobody. There is no professor of New Testament in the world that I know of in an accredited university, and there are thousands of people like this, who's a mythicist. I don't know. Do you know of one? I don't know of one.
I am not aware.
And that's not an accident. And it's not, they say, well, they're prejudiced against us. Well, they're prejudiced against you for the same reason that the biology department is prejudiced against somebody who doesn't believe in evolution, but believes in Adam and Eve. They think you don't have any evidence. And so, but, they get offended when I say that. I know they get offended, but I'm just telling you, the reality is this is the problem. So why not like use your intelligence to I don't know what your goal. I don't know what the goal is. But because I've never really kind of asked them the goal. But if the goal is to help people realize that Christianity is not true, you're not going to get there by saying things that people are just going to think are silly.
I have.
It's funny that last point of his, by the way.
Next question.
I myself make that point. So this just illustrates like he's not even paying attention to anything I'm saying, right? So I myself wrote a whole article on why you can't argue against Christianity with mythicism. Mythicism is not as much of a smoking gun. It's not as certain a conclusion, right? So I actually have said the thing that he just said there, and so the fact that he doesn't know that means he's not even paying attention to anything that I do. And when he said earlier on, like we're ignoring evidence. What evidence are we ignoring? Point out what is not on the historicity of Jesus. What evidence I didn't put in there that I don't address. Which he can't do because he refuses to read the book. So this is why like his position is entirely irrational. That he refuses to even look at what the argument is. He just dismisses it and comes up with all these excuses about motives and whatever as a reason not to even look at the argument, much less address the argument. So that's appalling to me. And that actually begs for an explanation as to what is his motive? Why is he so resistant to even just looking at the case? He won't even look at the case. Like, I don't even understand.
This is amazing.
Which is really irrational to do.
If I may, and I want to say this, I said this publicly on my channel, right? I lean historicist right now. Not because I am exhaustively understanding or that I think mythicism's stupid. Absolutely not. And in fact, that's
right.
When I did this, I didn't like, you don't see me going,
that's the thing with like him denigrating and saying like there's nobody. No, there's actually almost a dozen examples that he incorrectly claims don't exist. And I list them. I pointed out this item 22 in Ehrman recap article. No, these are sitting professors, some cases emeritus professors, but that's the same. And with full qualifications. So that like they at least will say not what he's saying. They'll say, well, this is a plausible argument that's worth considering, even if they themselves, like you, like lean historicist, right? Philip Davies is an example where he says, well, I'm a historicist, but I think there's something like this is a plausible argument. It deserves a seat at the table, same as anything else. Like if you're going to argue Jesus was a zealot, it's a violent revolutionary. That's respectable, even though it's not plausible, but it is respectable. Like they say, we can have this debate, right? And so Davies is an example of that. But then there are others who are admitted agnosticism about it. Hector Avalos, who just passed away recently, he came out as saying, like, I'm on the fence, like, and he's a sitting biblical professor.
I mean, if you were to pin me down, if you pinned me, like if you really pinned me, I guess I would be ultimately agnostic because I can't put any weight of certainty on any of this. I say what sounds to me, what makes more sense in my head to me, right? So that's it. But real quick.
No, actually, that's worth pointing out. You and someone in the comments also reminded me, like, the other thing is, like, he keeps conflating me with, like, you tried to get him to disassociate my work from internet randos, right. Which he wouldn't do. But he keeps assuming that, like, we're going around saying, no, it's absolutely certain Jesus didn't exist and this destroys Christianity. I mean, I've repudiated that perspective. I do not argue that at all. In fact, I tell people you shouldn't argue that. And secondly, my position is 1 in 3, like, as much as 1 in 3 chance there's a historical Jesus. So I'm admitting, like, there's a huge amount of uncertainty here. Like, I'm not going around saying I absolutely know for sure there was no Jesus. All I say is the preponderance of evidence seems to lean the other way. But I'm not going around confidently saying he definitely didn't exist. And so he doesn't even know what my position is. That's really shocking to me. And it's a shame.
Well, that's why when he said what he said, that's why I was like, okay, let me at least try to get him to say they're not Holocaust deniers, that kind of thing. I did try, and he didn't quite say you guys were, but you could tell he didn't want nothing to do with it. Real quick, what is the definition of a mythicist? How do you define it, Derek? Well, there's different kinds, if you will, of mythicists, but ultimately someone who does not believe in the historicity of Jesus is how we commonly use it here.
Yeah.
Even though I've seen people use the term, it's very rare that it's used for other historical people. Like to say
True.
that I'm a mythicist of this person in history or something, but mainly it's like a coined term for Jesus. And did this guy exist in history as an actual guy? Was there a kernel there? Not, is this guy a, configuration of multiple other historical people that make him into this or something? Was there a kernel? Was there a guy potentially at the start? And to me, mythicist says even that isn't the case, or most probably isn't the case. So it's someone who leans in that direction ultimately more so than sits on the fence or actually leans historicity.
Yep. I'd say that
answers it. I try to, and one more. We got the King Below. Thank you for the super chat. Bart really embarrassed himself in that clip. He continues to avoid actual arguments and instead resorts to pettiness and bizarre personal attacks. I would love to see you and him have a talk one day. I don't know how much money it would take.
Well, he won't, right? Yeah, he's adamantly against it and gets angry at any suggestion that it happened. And he's refused already thousands of dollars to do this. I think there was a group that offered him $5,000 to have it to do the Robert Price debate. That was going to be me and him, but he refused to have me as the opponent in that debate.
Wow. I always said I wondered what it would have been like if you did debate him on that. I always wondered. I still to this day kind of
know, because I wrote my post action report blog, right? Like, which we did some on your show too, to summarize some of that. But the whole idea of that, of like what it would look like, you can see like where I critique what I wouldn't have done. I even say like what I wouldn't have said if I were Price. And then what I would have said if I were in that position, and how I would have run the debate is pretty clear when you read my analysis of the Bart Ehrman, Robert Price debate.
Interesting. We got a few more super chats. I did miss your let me get this question here real quick. And then I'm going to get you guys here. I got to share the screen for this one. Sorry. It's from the past. Indo actually did a thing on mystery.
Yeah, I remember that. I thought that got dropped there.
It did, total accident. Bart, let's see. So if Christianity was a mystery cult, why did Paul and the gospel writers try to spread the message and save everyone? Does this contradict Mark 11-12?
No, right?
Mark
so
4:11?
The whole point of all mystery religions are evangelist, right? The whole point of them was to spread and grow and bring more people in for salvation. The thing that makes them a mystery cult is not that the cults hide. The thing that makes them a mystery cult is that to get your salvation, there's some sort of mystery, a secret that you have to know, and you have to be an insider. You have to be like sworn to secrecy and so on, and like an established insider to be given that, to be told what that is. And there might even be levels. Like, so the higher up, it's like the Masons, for example. The higher up you go, or Scientology is another example. The higher up you go, the more secrets you're told. And I show the evidence that Christianity was structured this way. There were higher levels of mysteries in Christianity. The higher ranking you were, the more you were told about these secrets. And these secrets you were sworn to keep, and they were never written down usually, because that would run the risk of them coming out and being revealed. So what was kept secret, what the secrets were, probably changed over time, because this is secret oral lore. That's the easiest shit to change, right? So there's no stability for it, which is why the sects of Christianity exploded so quickly. Is like you could have all these sects, they can radically change the secret teachings in any way they wanted. There's no real way to like out them, unless you like a spy, you go infiltrate and whatever. So and certainly for the first century, we don't know what the mysteries were, but Paul refers to these mysteries a lot. So in Elements, gosh, I think it's 13 to 14. In chapter 4 of On the Historicity of Jesus, I go into all the evidence for their mysteries that existed, and what we do know about them, which is very little, and in Christianity, and the fact that there were different levels of them. Paul refers to these mysteries and he hints at them. Sometimes he reveals them a little bit. We're not sure like how much he's giving away. Because he mentions, for example, marriage is a mystery. There's something about Jesus, some teaching about Jesus as a husband that is a mystery in the church. He alludes to it, but he doesn't tell you what it is. And so there's a lot of this stuff. So the mysteries were just kept for insiders. So when Mark is actually illustrating this point. Mark is illustrating, he has Jesus going around evangelizing. He's trying to get people to be saved and whatever. So he's evangelizing, but he's doing it by telling stories parables that are not true. And Mark has Jesus explain this. It's like, yeah, the parables I'm telling you, you're not supposed to take them literally true. They mean something else, but the secret meaning, I'm only going to tell you, the insiders, the apostles. And so this is a model for how the church ran. So that their public-facing storyline would be the gospel Jesus, but the mystery would be you'd come in and you'd learn, like, oh, well, actually, this is a metaphor for cosmic events and stuff like that, right? So that's how that would actually operate. And so you had to understand the secret meaning. And the literal meaning, if you took the literal meaning, Jesus says the people who take the literal meaning are damned. Like he says, those people will not be saved. So it's like, so you're not supposed to take the literal meaning. You're supposed to take the secret meaning. But the only way you only learn the secret meaning is by joining, right? So that, and this was a standard model. This is how all mystery religions worked. This isn't something new that Mark invented or Christians invented.
Is there a book you could recommend on reading, other than on the historicity that delves with mystery cults you think is important?
Mystery cults in general,
or mystery religions, if you will, like in this vein of the first century. Before we get to the super chats,
I'm trying to think of what I've got it jumbled in my head of what the latest one. Klauck has a decent book, I think. Obviously in the historicity of Jesus, I cite the leading literature. I'd have to go digging in there to find out what it was. Sorry, but there's Klauck, which is Klauck. He wrote a book on the mystery religions. I can't remember if that's the best one or the most recent one, but it is one of the top ones. There's a few others that I cite in OHJ. If I cite it in OHJ, that means I'm recommending it, unless I specifically give a qualifier in there. Like there's an old one, it's like from the early 20th or late 19th century that I think is valuable, but I don't recommend it. And I say in the book, like it's obsolete in many ways, but it does have useful data in it. So I don't recommend that for people who want to get an intro. I would go to something modern, something contemporary, which is, Klauck's book, for example. But there are others. I'm not remembering them off the top of my head, but they are the best ones are listed in that chapter 4 of On the Historicity of Jesus.
Thank you, Carrier. Donnie Springer, thank you. Putting aside the text and lack of traditional historical evidence, how would you account for the rise of a religion based around a man named Jesus in this time frame with no build-up?
I don't understand what no build-up means.
Putting aside the text and lack of traditional historical evidence, how would you account for the rise of a religion based around a man?
Maybe he'll add a comment, fill us in. I'm not sure. Right. I don't understand the question. So, are we asking like how could a historical Jesus have launched this religion, or are we asking how could the religion have launched without a historical Jesus? That's what I'm not.
This religion rose around or based around a man named Jesus in this time frame with no build-up. So that's a good question. Like, I don't know.
Well, the best, so there's two ways to take that. If it's about mythicism, then my book, Jesus from Outer Space, answers the question, because it talks about, there's a whole chapter in there about how the religion began and so forth without a Jesus and why that happened. But if the question is, how could a historical Jesus have done this? That I answer, I have answered. So I have talked about like how that would occur in various places. I'm trying to think of what was the one that would be the most relevant in answering this. So on the Historicity of Jesus, I have a section on revolution cults. There's a whole anthropology of revolution cults. And now those revolution cults were usually not led by someone. They're usually spontaneous arrivals of groups of people. So like the cargo cults, you had a bunch of different shamans hearing secret spirit messages and telegraph poles. Like they would put their ear up to a telegraph pole and spirits would talk to them. And there would be a bunch of them. And then a few sort of coalesced. And then eventually they attributed all those teachings to a guy who showed up on the island named John Frum or Tom Navy, or there's various different ones. One of them said Prince Philip, who's an actual historical person, but he never went to the island and never started the religion. But these are made up people. So that's actually a good model for mythicism. Is it starts like spontaneously, and it is very sudden. It is because it's a revolution cult, so it is like like a tipping point. It's like a tipping point religion. Like things come to a head and spill over, and so you have a sudden radical change, and this new radical religion gets pushed. And if it's successful, it becomes a significant religion. If it gets crushed, then or it becomes unpopular, then it doesn't. And so we have a lot of examples throughout history of these revolution cults. As Christianity fits the model perfectly. It fits the anthropological model to a T. And I show that on the Historicity of Jesus. And that's what it is. It's very much a response to the failure of Judaism in a way. So it's like there were people who were dissatisfied with what Judaism was doing. It wasn't meeting their needs. And there are a variety of reasons why. A lot of that had to do with the Roman conquest. It had to do with the fact that the Jewish elite was collaborating with the Romans. People didn't like that. It had to do with the fact that a lot of Judaism was obsolete. It didn't really address contemporary problems and contemporary needs. Or at least there's people who perceive that as being the case, right? So, and those are the people who were looking for something new. And those are the people who spilled over into this new revolution. And so we would say this, like Peter and the original apostles would be the tipping point. Like they started this religion. It wasn't really, even if it's a historical Jesus, I don't think he meant there to be a religion based around him. I think it's his apostles created that to market the ideas both that they had and that they got from Jesus. So even if it was a historical Jesus, I don't think it really was Jesus trying to start a religion. He was just a prophet trying to get people to come to a particular sectarian point of view, that right? So that and reject certain things and accept certain things and practice Judaism the way that he thought would be the appropriate and proper way. But his followers after his death, they are the ones who constructed this whole religion, complete with like resurrection theology and all the cosmic elements and the incarnationism and all of that stuff. That comes right out of the gate. And so they're building all of that to sell their religion. And some of that would have been based on the teachings of Jesus. Some of that would have been their own stuff that they wanted to push. And there would be a political angle to it, which is, it's resistance to the Jewish elite, resistance to the Roman powers, but through nonviolent means. So it is, and I talk about the logic of this in the beginning of chapter 5 of On the History of the City of Jesus. When you understand the actual political context in which Christianity arose, it perfectly makes sense, and you should totally have expected it to have arisen around that time. So if you want to understand that I do cover that in that book.
It's all down in the description, baby. Topic discussed by really good friend Gary. We're going to try and push through these super chats because we're running out of time. I'm throwing you a donation after this, Dr. Carrier, for your time too. By the way,
I appreciate that.
We didn't expect this to go so long, and I know a lot of people.
Yeah, it's all right. It's good. We have a lot of interest and good questions too.
It's MythVision podcast. You know what I'm saying? Come on. Thank you so much, Gary, for the super chat. I really appreciate it. To be a historicist, does that mean you have to believe there is a historic person? Is that the same as a historical nature of Santa Claus in that there might have been a saint named Nicholas? What would you say to that, Dr. Carrier?
Yeah, I have a problem with the analogy in that there isn't really any adult who thinks there's a historical Santa Claus in the mythic sense, right? So it's not like Jesus. It would be more like the angel Moroni, right? So the Mormons believe that the angel Moroni was an actual historical person. In fact, an actual man. Like Moroni used to be a human, and then was ascended to angelhood or whatever, and then centuries later came down to like reveal everything to Joseph Smith. They think that's a real historical person, and they think those are real historical events. But obviously not. There's no such angel Moroni. If you were to say you were a mythicist with regard to Angel Moroni, that would be accurate. It's just that everybody who's not a Mormon is a mythicist with regard to Angel Moroni. So it's usually not a significant statement, right? So people don't go around having to call themselves mythicists because Mormons are essentially a minor cult. They're a minor sect. They're not like white evangelicals in America. They don't dominate the narrative. And most people, even Christian evangelicals, rarely take Mormon theology seriously. So it's not as an issue as denying Jesus mythicism. And also there's no mainstream historian who thinks Moroni was an actual historical person. So there's no need for mythicism as a concept there. So it's not a challenge to any consensus. To be a historicist, I think a more interesting way to answer that question is how much of a Jesus do you need for you to be a historicist? And I do talk, I have a whole chapter, obviously chapter 2 and On the Historicity of Jesus, specifically about answering this question. But to really like summarize it, there are aspects of like the Gospel of Mark, like the whole crucifixion narrative is largely modeled on the death, the narrative of this other Jesus who died during the Jewish war, and Jesus ben Ananias. Now, the religion was not founded based on this. Like the gospel is taking a guy who lived long after the religion began, and then he had this similar narrative, and Mark just emulates that narrative and packs in the material he wants, which is a lot of stuff about Christianity, a lot of stuff from the Bible that he wants to associate with his Jesus and so on. So he is borrowing there was a historical Jesus ben Ananias probably, or at least more likely than not. And he is borrowing his story to tell the story of this other Jesus. But that doesn't make you a historicist to say that, because the religion wasn't begun by this Jesus ben Ananias. He might not even been alive then, or if he was, he wasn't a known figure. And the religion isn't based on that. And only a piece of the myth that Mark constructs is based on Jesus ben Ananias. And then you could say there's other people that he's drawing ideas from, Elijah and Moses and so on, that he's constructing his Jesus out of. So if you believed in a historical Elijah, I think that's 50-50 on there. If you believed in historical Elijah, that would not make you a historicist in and of itself, because you're saying, well, the mythical Jesus is based on Elijah, but they're not claiming that he was Elijah in the literal sense, right? So they're not claiming that Jesus wandered the earth in whatever century Elijah wandered the earth, right? They're not saying Jesus is Elijah. So historicists, you do have to believe that there's at least some dude who got himself killed, crucified specifically, so he got himself executed. And when Paul and the early apostles are going around claiming, if you believe in this guy, you'll go to heaven, or you'll be resurrected or whatever, they are referring to an actual man who was actually executed by the state, whether Roman or Jewish, doesn't matter. That's the minimal. You have to at least believe. It didn't even have to be named Jesus, by the way. Jesus could be a theological name they assigned him after. But as long as there was an actual man who taught some stuff, got himself executed, and that's the guy that these first apostles are going around saying is the Messiah and that he resurrected and all of this stuff, that's enough to be a historicist. You don't even have to say that he was named Jesus in life. He might have had some other name, because Jesus means Savior of God. It's a very convenient name to assign. It sounds like an assigned. Yes, it sounds like an assigned name. It was a common Jewish name, so there were people really called that. But it's also a really weirdly convenient name to call him the Savior of God. To call him Savior of God is, suspect. But also we have the example in Josephus of several of Jesus Christs. He never calls them Jesus. He never calls them Christs. There are lots of Jesuses in Josephus's history, but I'm talking about the Messianic figures. He never calls any of the Messianic figures Jesus specifically, or Joshua. Is what we mean. But he talks about them, tells stories about them where they were representing themselves as the new Joshua. It's like this new Messiah was going to come along, and he claimed that he was going to part the Jordan. Well, that's what Joshua did, the original Joshua, right? So this is a Joshua. He's claiming he's a new Joshua, and he's claiming that he's going to bring victory over the world and bring in paradise or bring victory over the Romans and satisfy the prophecies of Judaism, which means he's claiming to be a Messiah. So he's claiming to be a Jesus Christ, which is just not his name. It's just it's a role that the person is representing. And there are 6 of these in Josephus, 6 guys who fit this model, where they're representing themselves as Joshua and they're representing themselves as a Messiah. So they're all representing themselves as a Jesus Christ. So historicity wise, a plausible case could be made that our Jesus Christ, that's also a fake name, but there was a real guy that name is being assigned to, that a real guy who is purporting to be the new Joshua, just like Josephus records, and purporting to be the Messiah, and that this new guy was just not anywhere near as popular as the 6 that Josephus decided to cover, right? So so you see this whole rash of these guys doing this. So a historical Jesus fits in here. It's definitely plausible. It just means that he was one of the minor ones that just didn't even get on Josephus's radar. And that of all these attempts to create a new revolution in Judaism, only one of them succeeded. And that just happened to be the one that we ended up being called Christianity. So I think there's entirely plausible theories to build about a historical Jesus that don't require a lot of details. You can reject a lot of details about the historical Jesus and still have a historical core there and call yourself a historicist.
I do think it's funny in Acts how there's the equivocation to these other guys, and they're like one of them saying, like the walls of Jericho, so to speak, the walls of the temple are going to fall, or other examples that can be made, like go out here, I'm going to split the river, just like Joshua did. So I'm wondering if this is kind of saying, now this is the real Joshua. It's kind of a theological. It's interesting.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, that would make sense. Let's put it that way. That would be a plausible theory.
Either side can use that data, though. That's the problem that we have. So,
well, it is a problem. Yeah, it's epistemic, creates epistemic ambiguity, and that's a common state to be in for ancient history, where we're often not certain about.
And I want to say this, and I want this to be like, please absorb this. This is why either side, it's important not to be dogmatic and to approach this like enjoying this, especially if you're not someone who is an apologist, as we've been talking about with Daniel. where you have to have this be true, or else if you're showing this, like, you're not open-minded and having this dialogue and he did not exist, he did not prove it, if he did, you're like showing you're a fundamentalist on the opposite side, or vice versa. He had to have existed historically. You're a complete, it's like, let's calm down and say,
right, yeah, both are hyperbolic. I don't endorse either position. Whereas I'm sympathetic to both of the lesser positions. The reasonable historicity is a plausible position to take, and as is reasonable mythicism. So I reject these extreme absolutist points of view.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you. Crossover Maniac, thank you for the 5 follow-up question. Was the book of Mark originally intended to be just a story like Ben-Hur that was later declared to have actually taken place? And real quick before you answer that, thank you, Dion. Thank you so much. Love having Dr. Carrier on. I appreciate that love. Thank you for the super chat.
So I love the word intended, right? So that now we're talking psychology. We don't really know what was in the mind of the author of Mark, right? So we what his intentions were, we don't know. We can guess at, and we can guess at based on clues he's left and based on what was typical of the time. And the guesses are somewhat reliable, but not, I wouldn't assert as known fact. But so like Mark 4 has been brought up in this conversation where he has Jesus explain the doctrine of double truth, where there's the parables you're not supposed to take literally, but I'm telling them the outsiders are supposed to take them literally, and that's bad. And then but the insiders are supposed to get the real meaning. So Mark is cluing you in as that's probably how he intended his gospel. I think he intended that as the key to the whole gospel. He's telling you that this is just an extended parable about Jesus. If you're taking it literally, you're an outsider, you're doomed. But if you join us, we will tell you the secret meaning of all this stuff. I think that was the original intent of Mark. Gradually over time, as gospels kept to be written, they really started pushing more the historical angle of it. So the Gospels actually become more historicized over time. But by the time you get to Luke, like he's actually trying to make it look like a history with details and things like that. And then and he's even got like a preface, a methodological preface. It's a bad one, but it's at least he's attempting to sound like he's writing a history, which is not what Mark does at all. Matthew is trying to sound like a book of the Bible. He's trying to make his book sound like Deuteronomy, right, or Exodus or something like that. He's trying to make it look familiar, like Scripture. And then when you get to John, John's outright saying, no, this is literally historically true, and you're blessed if you believe it, and you're doomed if you don't. So he's completely flipped from what Mark is doing, right? Mark is doing the exact opposite of what John is doing. The authors of John, by the way, I don't think an actual John wrote it. So you see this progression of this desire to make it more historicized and to push the historicity, whereas Mark isn't doing that. He's doing the opposite of that. That's what I think. So that's what I think isn't. So I don't think he intends insiders. I don't think he intends Christians to take the story literally, but he might have intended outsiders to take it literally as a fake, right? As a distraction to mislead. And because we know this is what's going on in the other mystery religions, like the Osiris cult is a classic example. Plutarch wrote a book on this, and he wrote it for a priestess in the cult, so like someone who knew what she was talking about. So he couldn't make stuff up. But so he points it out, like the outward stories about Osiris being on Earth, being a pharaoh, and doing all these things are meant to deceive or trick outsiders. They're meant for outsiders. But insiders know the truth, that this is all an allegory for cosmic events. There was no actual historical Osiris. So Plutarch's talking about this as just a normal way to run a mystery religion. So I suspect when you put these two pieces of evidence together, I suspect that's what Mark is doing. I can't prove it. Like we can't interview Mark and ask him. There's no secret letter where he confesses. So we don't know.
Interesting. Yeah.
But that's what I suspect is the case is going on with Mark. And now later Gospels, they start changing up the way they want to do things. But
right. One thing on Mark, I love sneaking my little questions into these super chats. But the last thing I wanted to ask is, do you think that Mark's making, and this is all like, there's many different ways to look at this, but do you think Mark's making the apostles look really ridiculous because of Paul's animosity between the original apostles, and Mark's using Paul's ideas that he's like, they're dummies, they don't know what they're talking, they miss this? Or do you think there's other reasons? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's another one of those examples where I don't know the psychology of Mark, so I don't really know what he's doing.
Why not?
The only reason I don't fully endorse what you're saying, because it's plausible what you're talking about, right? It's a plausible position to take. There are two reasons why. One is Matthew doesn't get rid of it. So Matthew is the Petrine sect. So clearly the Petrine sect themselves saw a value in that version of the narrative. So they were doing something with it and they kept it. So they saw something that was usable. So that leads me to suspect that there was some point to it. And then when we look at the external evidence, so like Dennis McDonald has talked about this, where Mark is, and one of the things Mark is doing, two things. He's emulating Deuteronomy, just as Matthew is doing. More focused on the Exodus, but he's emulating the Jews. If you notice the story of the Exodus, the bumbling Jews that don't trust Moses and constantly betray him and don't, like walk away or like resist him or whatever, and then bad things happen to them and they just never come around and trust him. And all these amazing miracles happen and they still don't trust that God's going to help them. So they're exactly like the apostles in Mark. Like it's just typecast, right? So that's clearly he's creating a model of Moses and the bumbling Jews following and not trusting him. So they're represented as a model for how not to be, just as in Exodus. The whole narrative is a model for don't act like these fickle, untrusting, never learning anything Jews. Like, trust Moses, right? Like, that's the whole story. Is like the message of the story is you should have trusted Moses the whole time. You're much better off. And so using the bumbling people is a device for doing that. And another aspect of that is, as Dennis McDonald also points out, is that this also emulates Odysseus and his crew. The whole myth of the Odyssey has the exact same model, where Odysseus' crew are a bunch of bumbling idiots that Odysseus has to constantly save from, so it's a similar model. So it's clearly a motif that was very popular. It had a cultural resonance at that time as a narrative to tell about heroes. And then the other side of it is that the whole point of Christianity was that this was a secret that no one understood. And only after the resurrection did people finally get it. Right. So like that you find in, 1 Corinthians 15, like the apostles, Paul doesn't even mention the ministry of Jesus. Right. And which I think is curious. But if you're a historicist, you still have to admit Paul thought that was, not only did Paul think this, but the creed that he's quoting, which is the original creed developed by the apostles. It's that he's quoting. It's not his creed. That creed has no ministry in it. Like, so they didn't give a shit about the ministry of Jesus. The only thing that mattered right out of the gate is Scripture predicted the resurrection, the death and resurrection. Scripture predicted the death and resurrection, and we saw Jesus resurrected. That's it. That's the whole creed. And so the whole idea is based on people were ignorant and didn't know. And you see this 1 Corinthians 2 as well. So like the idea of God hid the secret to fool everyone, and particularly fool Satan and his demons. And then only the particularly chosen and wise learned the truth and realized the truth. That's all part of Christianity. So Mark is reifying this Pauline storyline. So like the apostles are bumbling idiots until, up until the resurrection. Now in Mark's case, he doesn't narrate the resurrection, but Mark's writing from the assumption that your reader knows the story from then on, right? That he knows that, well, then the appearances happened, then the resurrection appearances happened, then the creed started, and so on, so that the apostles turned around when they were convinced. And so Mark is creating this model of people who weren't convinced. And so it's not necessarily a critique of the apostles. The apostles might have actually originated this notion that they were bumbling fools until they were enlightened, right? So this concept may have already existed. And then Mark just turns it into a narrative, like builds it into a story. This all makes sense. So the idea that he's criticizing the apostles, which is a mainstream, like it's a theory out there, like it's taken seriously. It's not, I don't think it's proven. I lean more towards the theory that I just elaborately explained.
You made it sound really good too, by the way. I want to say to 553 people watching right now, please hit that like button. This has been a heck of a live. Seriously, you've got a lot of attention. And go in the description, get his books. I'm telling you, they're worth it. And he's on Audible. So if you're driving, you got a trip coming up, 3 hours, 4 hours, don't matter, a couple hours, get on Audible, start chipping away and get this information. Even if you don't agree, I want to hear why. That's why I love this stuff. Like, it's so cool to learn. Converse Contender, he's a good friend, actually. He's been on the live. He's a cool guy. He's a Christian. We disagree. But nonetheless, he says, will you debate future Christian historian Camille?
Anytime Camille wants to. We've had exchange of blog articles on the subject, so people can go to my blog and look at what I've written in response to Camille Gregor's treatment of this. Gregor takes at least a lot of this more seriously than like, for example, Bart Ehrman does. Like, he's actually understands the math and is trying to like interpret how I'm using the math. I think he gets things wrong, but they're not because of incompetence or resistance to discussing it. Like he's like Bart Ehrman, for example. But I think Gregor's got some interesting things to say, and then so I can explain why he's getting things wrong about the way I argue in my book. But if you want to learn about that, you can find my article on the blog. Right. And then I think, once I'm assuming he's read that, and so he knows where I'm coming from there, so that we could actually have a productive debate that builds on that exchange. Definitely. I don't myself organize debates though. So
yeah,
someone else would have to organize that.
I'd be the guy, but he said he wanted to first get a PhD. And
yes, that's right. I have heard that.
And I respect that.
That's totally legit. Yeah, I have no criticism for that approach.
Yeah, and I mean, he's a smart guy. So, I really would love to do that in the future. Thank you for the super chat, Converse. Let's talk in the future, man. You can also email me. You can find me on Facebook. I'm all over the place. Alan, thank you for the super chat. If we accept Harold Lloyd was the prototype for Superman, is it reasonable to call Superman a historical character?
No, that wouldn't constitute historicity, right? That would be another Elijah comparison, right? So even if Elijah existed, that wouldn't mean Jesus existed, just because Jesus was based on Elijah, for example. So no, that the answer would be no.
Thank you for the super chat. No, I appreciate you sticking this extra time. Everybody hit that like button. Share this out. Someone needs to see this. Look, this thumbnail that I made, I went on YouTube and I looked up specific titles for Daniel as a forgery. And in fact, I saw mostly Christian videos. Right. I saw a pastor. I saw a 2-minute video of a pastor saying, people are saying Daniel's a forgery and that it was written in 90 AD or sometime like that. And I'm like, wait, that is like the worst. Nobody serious is saying that. So he must have went in front of his audience and said, I'm going to preach this really wacky theory here to let everyone know, don't worry, Daniel's not a forgery, and not address the serious situation of why it really is. And so I had to have you come on. This is going to be on YouTube. Anyone that thinks Daniel's not a forgery, I was going to ask you about Porphyry, but 3rd century historian who literally says he thinks it's a forgery. But
yeah. I don't talk about this in my article. The reason being is, as I mentioned in the video I did, the post-game analysis video I did with Jonathan Sheffield and Boyce and so on. So Porphyry did notice some of the things that we now notice about Daniel. But Porphyry himself is not a modern historian. He didn't get everything right. So I mean, it's interesting that he noticed these things and published it. But I don't see him as someone to go to as the source for this idea. Go to contemporary historians. There's, the current commentaries, peer-reviewed commentaries. That's where you go now for current scholarship on this. You don't need to rely on anything Porphyry said.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Kerr. Oh, my good friend Craig and Ford, we're doing a mythology show coming up about Odin and Thor. So be on the lookout for that. And we're not talking about like just the movies or something. Like, he actually wants to tell you the history of these myths. Yeah. And, awesome. And how they actually in the Proto-European world, like how this played a part. So go subscribe to his channel. He's going to be live on MythVision. You guys will see it. Thank you.
Yeah, I've been on his show too. He's really cool. So I recommend checking out his channel for sure.
Seriously, if you want to go see that interview, it's on his channel right now. So Craig and Ford, thank you so much, man. I love you guys. And thank you, Dr. Carrier. I'm going to be shooting you that money here for spending this time with me. And everyone who doesn't know, I have to say this before we go. I know everything keeps added, but get on MythVision Patreon. Help Dr. Carrier too. When I go and fly in July,
August? Oh gosh, no, it's September.
September. Yeah. I'm sorry, I'm going to so many places.
Yeah.
September, awesome. I'm going to be there, and I'm interviewing you for 2 full days. I hope you'll let me harass you and get everything I can. Yeah, we're going to promote you like crazy. All your content, asking tons and tons of questions. I'm taking Patreon questions. Go join. All of that'll be early on Patreon and slowly released on YouTube. So I'm looking forward to that one, Dr. Carrier.
Yeah, me too.
And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, never forget, if you have cognitive dissonance and you think that Daniel was written in the 6th century BC, then you might not remember that we are MythVision.